move those down until I need to read with them. Good evening and welcome. It is just a thrill to see so many people out on a rather cold Minnesota night, but we are Minnesotans. So of course we're out on a Minnesota night. We're especially excited that you're here because we are very, very excited to be kicking off our very first Native Leaders Speaker Series. It's a 2026 series, and we have various people lined up to talk to us throughout the year, and we are so honored that Reverend Jim Bear Jacobs has agreed to be our very first speaker in something that we have been putting together. Those of you who are members here at New Branches know that we've been at this for 5 years or close thereto, or maybe even a little beyond. So welcome, welcome. We're thrilled to have you. So for those of you who are not New Branches members, New Branches is an ecumenical partnership between 3 faith communities: Lake Nokomis Lutheran Church, Living Table United Church of Christ, and Spirit of St. Stephen's Catholic Community. And we all share worship space, and occasionally we worship together, and it's a beautiful partnership. Your hosts for this evening and the people who envisioned this, and then the idea was picked up by the New Branches community, is a group called the Land Acknowledgement and Beyond Group. And the Land Acknowledgement and Beyond Group began after the murder of George Floyd. And before we could all gather, we had decided we would be an ecumenical faith community, but we hadn't yet met each other. So while the building was being worked on, there were book discussion groups that were set up, and they were intentionally mixed. They were people from all 3 faith communities. And Jim Bear, I gave you a little preview, but our first introduction to Jim Bear Jacobs is that Jim Bear is the author of that book, and many of you who participated will remember Jim Bear did several of the videos that we watched, but it was so inspiring. And the reason Land Acknowledgement and Beyond Group got started was because the group that I led, and a group that was led by Ann King at Living Table United Church of Christ, read the essay on the residential Indian boarding schools and the impact. And that was an essay that just stayed with us. And when we finished the whole series, God bless them, the people that I led said, I thought that we were going to get together and they were going to say, thank you, Sally, thanks for facilitating. It's been nice knowing you, and we'll see you when we all come to church. And instead they said, could we look at doing a land acknowledgement, at writing a land acknowledgement? And I cried a little bit, and I said, I'm so proud of all of you. I never wanted just to be, in a book discussion group. And 5 years later, here we are. We have a land acknowledgement for New Branches. We will soon have a land acknowledgement that is personal to all 3 faith communities. So this is a very, very exciting night. And this is the first public offering as part of the Living Beyond Our Land Acknowledgement for New Branches, is this evening with Jim Bear Jacobs. So, a little bit about how the evening will go. Soon I will be quiet, which, is something. But then I'll sit down and Jim Bear Jacobs is going to speak to us until approximately 8 o'clock. And at about 8 o'clock, he will open the floor to questions. He has questions that were submitted ahead of time, but he'll also take questions from the floor. So if you think of something as you're here, we will circulate with that. Also, those of you who are attending online, welcome. And your questions will also be added to the mix. After the Q&A period, we will say our thank yous, and then many of you saw as you came in, we have light refreshments and warm beverages to cheer you as you head back home for the evening. Now, a few housekeeping things. Exit from the sanctuary is the doors that you came in. We have exits to the building should it be necessary, to the right, and then up by the front door and to the left. I'd just go out the front door if we need to exit. We have a water fountain, but we also have a pitcher of water with glasses on the kitchen bar in the commons. We also have bathrooms. They are to the right, and if you just need to go, just go, come back in, join us. If you have not yet silenced your phone, we do ask that you do that. One other announcement before we formally start the evening is that we are inviting everybody who is here this evening to make a free will donation to All Nations Indian Church. Those of you who are in my faith community, those of you who are at New Branches know that we help them. Every other Wednesday, we go and help put on a luncheon for the Metro Urban Indian Directors. Some of us volunteer for that. Second and fourth Fridays, we help with Elders Bingo. But with all that has been going on with ICE, with all that has been going on with the federal authorities, All Nations has expanded its mutual aid and community care ministry. They are carrying fear, and this is the message from Kelly Sherman Conroy and Pastor Joanne Conroy. Our community is carrying fear and grief right now. At All Nations Indian Church, we are responding with free, traditional, and holistic care for anyone who needs support. Your donation helps to provide movement chaplains offering grounded presence, free therapy and mental health support, body-based healing practitioners, support animals for comfort, community care kits for families and youth. Care should never cost anyone their dignity. This fund helps keep healing accessible and available to all. And we have a basket outside, and some of you have already given, thank you. We also have sheets with a QR code, and if you want to take it with you and invite others to donate to this, it is so important. And with that, I'd like to bring us in, take a deep breath. Let's ground ourselves to be with Jim Bear Jacobs. And we want to begin by acknowledging that New Branches is located on ancestral land of the sovereign Dakota Nation, stolen through dishonest dealings and broken treaties. We honor as truth that this land was, is, and will always be sacred to the Dakota people and integral to their identity and spirituality. With gratitude for the many ways that we continue to benefit from the wisdom and work of the Dakota people and those with whom they shared this land, we acknowledge the complicity of Christian churches in past and present injustices. These harmful acts range from genocide, ethnic cleansing, forced assimilation, and unjust exile to ongoing practices that oppress and marginalize Indigenous people. We commit to continued learning and truth-telling, and we commit to taking action led by our Native relatives that leads to justice for Indigenous people in our community and beyond. And because you're here to hear, thank you. Because you are here to hear from Jim Bear, if it's okay with you, other than asking people to keep an eye out, the other place we've met Jim Bear Jacobs is Jim Bear and Kelly Sherman Conroy recently led a rally, a peaceful prayer rally, out at the Bishop Whipple building during which an eviction notice was served on federal authorities who are conducting illegal and inhuman activities against our immigrant neighbors, against U.S. citizens, and against our Native relatives. And this is in the same place that natives who survived the U.S. Dakota War were imprisoned, and we have had a program about that. But we want to acknowledge that. Thank you, Jim Bear, for your leadership, for your wisdom. You might have heard a little bit of what he's going to talk about tonight, but we are just so honored that you are here to help us learn, so that when we act, we are acting from an understanding of how those who came before us created harm. And I think everybody who's here this evening is committed to doing something about that, and doing it meaningfully and powerfully. So without further ado, I give you the Reverend Jim Bear Jacobs.
Kundamante. All right. This whole Minnesota nice thing is way overblown, because I don't know about you, but I was raised that when someone greets you, you greet them back. So, Kundamante. See, there you go. You're getting it. Aho Kundamante, ni Tijinji Makwa, Jim Bear Jacobs, ni Taktalangamau, ni Mohicanu, and Kakosatoa, Kundamante, and ni Shik, Wewe Net. I give you greetings and introduce myself as Bear, or Jim Bear Jacobs, and you can just refer to me as Jim Bear. I am from the Turtle Clan, and I'm a citizen of the Stockbridge-Munsee Band of Mohican Indians. And with goodness in my heart, I extend my gratitude to all of you that have joined me today. So I introduced myself as Mohican, and I'm sure if you are anything like the literally thousands of people I have encountered in my life who hear Mohican and then say, well, that's not possible, because I read a book in grade school by James Fenimore Cooper called The Last of the Mohicans. Okay? Let me introduce you to a little literary genre called fiction. The Mohican people, our contemporary homeland, our reservation right now, is a tiny dot on the map in central Wisconsin. However, our ancestral homelands are the Hudson River Valley, basically from Manhattan Island up to Lake Champlain in upstate New York, if you're familiar with that area. So we as Mohican people, we are roughly about 1,100 miles away from our ancestral homeland, but that is a narrative that is not unique, really, to any indigenous people group. So much of us, even here in Minnesota, the Dakota people included, that idea of being uprooted and relocated is, it's just a narrative that is, unfortunately, all too familiar to us. And we're going to, in the presentation today, kind of get into really the genesis. Where does that ideology find its foundation? That ideology that, people are disposable, so long as the resources that are under the feet upon which they walk are valuable, then people are disposable. I will just apologize if I seem a little harried today. I gotta tell you, I didn't, I'm 49 years old, and I never thought I would find myself in this station of life. But I kind of recently got into antiquing. Anyone into antiquing? Like literally my partner and I, she and I, we just spent a weekend up in Grand Rapids, and we did nothing but go to antique shops. And anyway, this afternoon I was perusing Facebook Marketplace like you do, and there was just this gorgeous entry, like foyer table, you know, with all the beautiful, like, European curves and the woodwork and everything. And I made the mistake of showing it to my partner, and she said, "Oh my God, we got to go get that." So, rather than have a couple of hours to relax and center myself for this presentation, I find myself speeding out to Minnetonka to load up a table. But if you're an antiquer, you know that you can't pass up those opportunities. You're just going to kick yourself. So today I've been asked to just kind of give some background on the Doctrine of Discovery. And really, the Doctrine of Discovery is something that I'm willing to bet that 10 years ago, none of you heard of. Would I be accurate? Yeah. I mean, I didn't even hear about it. I suppose like 12 years ago, 12, 13 years ago is when I really started hearing about the Doctrine of Discovery, and I knew nothing of it. So I've done a lot of research and kind of investigating, finding best ways to bring down into a really approachable conversation about what is the Doctrine of Discovery. And this is important because, as you can see, you know, by my name up there on the screen, the word reverend is in front of my name. I am an ordained minister in the Christian tradition. And the Doctrine of Discovery, at its source, is a Christian doctrine. Now we will, through our presentation today, come to discover that it is no longer just a Christian doctrine, but its source, very much so, is within the Christian tradition. It is a Christian doctrine. And so, we're going to have to do that trick where we find out why the remote's not working. There we go. Okay. So what is the Doctrine of Discovery? Let's see if I can do this now too, so that I can be yellow light. There we go. So what is the Doctrine of Discovery? So the doctrine was laid out in a series of papal bulls. Now, papal bull, that word bull, don't let it confuse you. It just means an official document. It gets that name bull from bullus because these were documents that were officially sealed, and then the Pope's insignia was hung on it in like a lead or metal ball. And the Latin word for that is bulbus. So out of that word bulbus comes papal bull. So these official documents that were verified and then sealed with these bulbus, they become known as papal bulls. So there's papal bulls throughout history on all sorts of stuff, and there's still papal bulls being written today. So it was a series of decrees. The first one is issued in the year 1452. They authorized colonial powers such as Spain and Portugal. Now, these are the two world powers that the Doctrine of Discovery initially primarily applies to. And it gave these nations, Spain and Portugal, the authority to seize lands and subjugate people in Africa and the New World, as long as the people in those lands were not Christian. Okay, that is a very important part. So essentially what the Doctrine of Discovery is it's a very early peace treaty between the nations of Spain and Portugal. So understand that in the early to mid 15th century, Spain and Portugal are really the power players in this up and coming age of exploration. And this is all driven by the spice trade, okay? So as these trade routes are developed through northern Africa and even through Asia and into India, these overland trade routes, spices really, a lot of them at this time are more valuable than gold or precious gems. And so these colonial powers, particularly Spain and Portugal at the time, there's a lot of money at stake. Okay? However, both Spain and Portugal are they're Christian nations, right? They're subject to their crown, the kings that rule these nations, but they're also subject to the Vatican and the Pope. And essentially, the Catholic Church recognizes that, well, we have these trade routes, there's a lot of money at stake, but we can't really, it's not good PR, right, if one Christian nation is fighting with another Christian nation over some dollars. So we're going to establish this peace treaty. So the Doctrine of Discovery initially really has its origins in a very early peace treaty between these nations of Spain and Portugal. And what it essentially does is it says, if Spain arrives to a new place, and there are no Christians there, then Spain then has the right of discovery. They can plant a flag, say a few prayers in Latin, and then this is now Spain. This land is now belongs to Spain. And if Portugal comes any time after that, having discovered for themselves this new land, well, it's already been discovered. The right of discovery falls back to Spain. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. So the Doctrine of Discovery, okay. Am I doing something wrong? Okay. So in 1452, a papal decree is issued by Pope Nicholas V that is called Dum, you have to see it, Dum Diversis, okay? Comes out in June of 1452. And what it says, we weighing all and singular, it's going to be easier for me to do this than just look over my shoulder all the time. We weighing all and singular the premises with due meditation, and noting that since we had formerly by other letters of ours granted, among other things, free and ample faculty to the aforesaid King Alfonso, that's King Alfonso of Portugal. And they have such flowery language, don't they? Just how it flows off the tongue. This is the authority that was given to King Alfonso to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens, Saracens is just a $5 word for Muslims, and pagans, whatsoever, and other enemies of Christ, wheresoever placed, and the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, possessions, and all movable and immovable goods whatsoever. I mean, talk about being all-inclusive, right? If you can move it, it's yours. If you can't move it, it's still yours. All movable and immovable goods whatsoever held and possessed by them, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery. To reduce their persons to perpetual slavery. This is pretty all-encompassing. Remember, this is coming from the highest religious authority in the world. It's coming from Pope Nicholas V. And it allows, this gives the theological, which remember at the time, theological authority was also legal authority, okay? Because the whole separation of church and state was not a thing back then. Okay? So this gives the theological foundation and authority as well as the legal foundation and authority. So essentially, you arrive at a previously undiscovered, and we'll put that word in quotes, but you arrive at a previously undiscovered land that is inhabited by people. So long as they're not Christian already, whatever they have that you can move is yours. Whatever they have that you can't move is still yours. All of the lands that are under their authority are now yours, and their bodies, their very persons, do what you want. Perpetual slavery. The Doctrine of Discovery, as I said, originally shows up in 1452 in Dum Derivas. It shows up again in 1454 in a document called Romanus Pontifex. Reiterating again, we do by these presents forever give, grant, and appropriate to the aforesaid King Alfonso and his successors, kings of the said kingdoms, and to the Infante, which is just a fancy word of saying the second born in a line of succession. And what do the successors, that being that line of succession, that direct heir, and the Infante, meaning the second born, what do they get? Provinces, islands, harbors, places, and seas. Now, I mean, they were like, this Pope was really like wanting to make it crystal clear. Because he names the islands, names the harbors, names the provinces, and then just places. Basically, whatever you want, if it's a place, it's yours. Okay? You following me? It's going to be a lot easier if I have some more feedback. You following me? Thank you. I don't know if any of you are public presenters, but isn't it a lot more enjoyable when your audience is playing off of you? Okay. So this wasn't just one pope. This wasn't just Pope Nicholas V, because we're trying to advance the slide here. Because in 1493, now why is 1493 a significant date? What happened the year before this? Right. In 1492, Columbus, see? Yeah, you all remember it. So 1492, Columbus sails under the crown of Spain. Okay, remember? This is essentially a peace document between Spain and Portugal. Okay? Columbus, sailing under the flag of Spain, reaches the so-called New World, and then turns around and comes back and tells the Spanish monarchs all that he says. Word of this reaches the Vatican. We now have to double down. We now have to reiterate the Doctrine of Discovery. But we have a new pope. Okay, we have Pope Alexander VI. And what he says in 1493, we'll have to go to the next slide, please. There we go. That no right conferred on any Christian prince is hereby to be understood as withdrawn or to be withdrawn. So what Pope Nicholas VI is saying is that just because we have a new pope now, doesn't mean that any of the good work we've done previous to this is to be withdrawn. Remember what we just heard from Pope Nicholas V, that this goes to the successors, goes to the Infante, the other second and third born, those that are not directly in line for any inheritance, but hey, we're still going to give them the provinces, the princes, all of this. And Pope Alexander VI says that this is to be understood that it is never to be withdrawn. So we are continuing now, what are we, 4 decades into this? this. We're 2 popes into this. We're still reaffirming. Okay? Now, lest we think, okay, we'll go to the next slide. Are you just controlling this, or is this not working at all? Oh, it is. Okay. All right. Lest we think that this is just, coming out of the Vatican. Lest we think that this is just, these nations that are subject to the Vatican, Spain and Portugal. 3 years after Pope Nicholas VI generates that papal bull, we now have King Henry VII in England. We did. He was there a second ago. All right, there. So, England is now going to get into the age of exploration. King Henry VI commissions an explorer, a sailor, John Cabot, to go out and explore for England. And commissions John Cabot and gives him kind of these marching orders, these kind of legal document that comes from King Henry VI, 1496. And that the before mentioned John and his sons, or their heirs and deputies, okay, so again, right, like it's not just whoever is sailing, it's not just whoever is exploring. Remember that language from our first slide, perpetual slavery, like perpetuity, we're continuing this forward. Here we have King Henry VII conferring the authority of this doctrine upon John Cabot, upon his sons, upon their heirs, and deputies, just whoever these heirs or John or whoever they deem worthy to carry any authority. This is broadcast authority upon them. And what authority do they have? Well, they may conquer, occupy, and possess whatsoever such towns, castles, cities, and islands by them thus discovered, that they may be able to conquer, occupy, and possess as our vassals and governors, lieutenants, and deputies therein, acquiring for us the dominion, title, and jurisdiction of those same towns, castles, cities, islands, and mainlands so discovered. Right? Again, this is an all-inclusive package, right? Remember we saw before, like, the harbors and the mainlands and just places. Here we have castles, cities, towns, right? Very inclusive. And again, that notion of this is an authority that is staying, it's long-lasting, it's moving in perpetuity. So, that's what we have when our European royalty are having little tit for tat over there in Europe. Spain lays claim to a land, then Portugal lays claim to a land. Now England is in the game, they're laying claim to land, right? You have this kind of trifecta of colonial superpowers, right? You wonder why so much of the world speaks Spanish. Trace it back to this. You wonder why Brazil speaks Portuguese. Comes back to this. You wonder why English is an official language in so much of the world. It all comes back to this 15th century doctrine of discovery that really fueled the age of exploration. Okay? So what does that have to do with us good, God-fearing, hardy Americans, right? So the doctrine of discovery is codified into U.S. law in 1823 in the Supreme Court case, Johnson versus McIntosh. Now, essentially what this court case was, it was a court case that was litigated about the proper fee title to land, okay? Very briefly, and this is going to be a pretty rough synopsis. If you're really interested, look up the case and study it in depth for yourself. But essentially you had two men, one named Johnson, one named McIntosh, okay? And they both purchase some land. The problem is, they both purchase the same plot of land. Now, one purchases the land through what is widely sought to be the correct legal channels. They went through the land office, the U.S. government, deeded the land to, I think that one was Johnson. I think Johnson purchased the land from the land office. But there's this guy McIntosh out there who's laying claim to the same land because McIntosh bought the land, but he didn't buy it through the legal federal government channels. McIntosh bought the land directly from the Indians that were in possession of the land. Now we have this giant case that's being heard before the Supreme Court. Who actually owns the land? Who is the proper owner of the land? Is it Johnson, who went through the government channels, or is it McIntosh, who dealt directly with the natives who were in possession of the land? So this case goes to the Supreme Court. It's argued in 1823. And Chief Justice John Marshall, in writing his opinion, speaking of this, says, but their rights to complete sovereignty as independent nations, he's talking about the native peoples, their rights to complete sovereignty as independent nations were necessarily diminished. Let me repeat that. Necessarily diminished. And the power to dispose of the soil at their own will to whomsoever they pleased was denied by the original fundamental principle that discovery gave exclusive title to those who made it. Think about that. The rights of sovereignty were necessarily diminished. Not because of anything that they did to forego their sovereignty, but simply because they were what? Discovered. And who does that then authority fall upon? Discovery gave exclusive title to those who made it. Discovery, the rights of sovereignty, authority, falls to those, the discoverers. While the different nations of Europe respected the right of the natives as occupants, they asserted the ultimate dominance to be in themselves. Well, isn't that convenient? Who has the ultimate authority here? Well, we do. By what authority do you have the ultimate authority? Because we said so. Right? Anyone grow up evangelical Christian like I did? And you hear about the authority of Scripture? Scripture is all authoritative. Well, why is Scripture all authoritative? Because Scripture says so. Same thing. Circular logic, right? Circular reasoning. Anyone take any kind of logics courses in undergrad like I was forced to, and you're like, this circular reasoning thing, it doesn't hold up anywhere except in U.S. case law and theology, apparently. As the doctrine of discovery is codified into U.S. law in 1823. Basically, what Johnson v. McIntosh says is that all of the legal basis for fee title ownership of land falls to the U.S. government that was conferred upon them by, in our case, British Crown law. Okay, so I mean the United States, as now this newly developed sovereign in 1776, they become the inheritors of the authority over the land. Okay? From here, it spreads out. And really those ripples, again, it started as kind of an international thing in the 1400s, focuses down through England into the United States, and from there ripples outward. So the Doctrine of Discovery as international law No, I'm going too fast here. Okay. Am I on the right slide here? Hold on one second, I apologize. Where am I? That's not where I want to be. Here's where I want to be. Okay. So the Doctrine of Discovery as international law. The Doctrine of Discovery remains the original and controlling precedent for indigenous rights and affairs in 4 countries who derive their legal system from British common law. Okay, does that make sense? So there are 4 countries that really their source, they were colonies of Great Britain. As a result of their historically being colonies of Great Britain, their common law, their law that they operate under, is derived from British Crown law. Those 4 countries are Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. Okay? Now, in 2017, there is presentations at the United Nations on this little document called UNDRIP. Does anyone know what UNDRIP is? It's the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Okay? So in 2000. Times have signed on to that document, but isn't it four nations refuse to sign any declaration of rights for indigenous people? And really, when you think about it, in terms of historically, nations that have atrocious histories with how they have treated their indigenous peoples, are there any other nations that would top the list of these 4? Canada. How many of you followed the Truth and Reconciliation Commission on Indigenous boarding schools in Canada? Yeah. The reports that came out of there, if they don't make you cry, then spend some time in therapy and prayer. Australia, we know that the Aboriginal peoples there is treated horribly, likewise New Zealand, and of course, the United States. The doctrine of discovery keeps rippling through the 21st century. In another Supreme Court decision, this one in 2005, this Supreme Court case called the People of Sherrill, New York versus Oneida Nation. Again, this is another Supreme Court case about the legal title of a section of land. Two competing claims, one being the people of this town in New York, named Sherrill, so Sherrill, New York. The other being the indigenous people whose land that is their ancestral origin, the Oneida Nation. In the majority decision, it is quoted that under the doctrine of discovery, fee title to the land, remember this is all about legal fee title to the land occupied by Indians when the colonists arrived became vested in the sovereign. First, in the discovering European nation, which would be England in this case. First, in the discovering European nation, and later the original states and the United States. So, this justice is just bringing it right through history, right? The fee title first fell upon the discoverer, then becomes inherited by the 13 original colonies, the 13 original states, and then once we really round out our colonial experiment and we have our robust United States, the United States becomes the ultimate inheritor of this legal authority, this fee title to the land. Now, we all know the Supreme Court, right? How it operates. You have some judges. Some of them are conservative, appointed by conservative presidents. Some of them are more liberal, appointed by more progressive presidents. And these two just kind of duke it out and one wins, right? This decision, written by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, our heroine of liberal progressivism. Now, please understand, I'm a fanboy of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I really am, right? When she died, I mean, I cried and I wept for our nation. I really love Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And this is not to speak against RBG. This is to demonstrate how ubiquitous this is. How just inherent to our identity as a nation this is, that when our shero of liberal progressive ideology, when she herself is citing the doctrine of discovery in case law, that's how ubiquitous this is. That's how just, you know, it's like that old analogy, the two fish in a fishbowl, and one says, "How's the water today?" and the other says, "What is water?" Right? This is just the air we breathe. It becomes so inherent into who we are that even our heroes are bound to the case law. The doctrine of discovery echoes yet still into the 21st century. In, I believe this was 2016, I'd ask you to go back through history and figure out where are those contributions that have been made by these other categories of people that you are talking about. Where did any other subgroup of people contribute more to civilization? This is U.S. Representative Steve King of Iowa in 2016. And essentially what Steve King is doing is he's defending white supremacy. Now, he won't say he's defending white supremacy. He'll say he's defending Western civilization. But if you know Steve King, if you don't know Steve King, you're not missing anything. But if you know Steve King, when he says Western civilization, he means white people. Okay? And he's asking, I mean, just think of the language. All these other subgroups of people. You know, I believe the context of this came up in talking about these months of recognition and celebration, like Black history, women's history, you know, Native American heritage, these kind of things. And I just had to throw this in here, okay? In response to the picture you see there on the left, if you can't make it out, we have 4 indigenous women of various age standing in front of the Mount Rushmore monument, which, if you know, Mount Rushmore, located in, honestly, the most sacred place for the Lakota people. Before Mount Rushmore looked like this to the Lakota people, it was called the Hill of the Seven Grandfathers. And if you can find some pre-Rushmore photographs, you can find them. If you find some pre-Rushmore photographs, you can see why it received that name. That hill received that name, the Hill of the Seven Grandfathers. But, you know, we had to celebrate what we're good at, which is destroying beautiful things and monumentalizing white men. When you consider that this monument is literally in some of the most sacred land for the indigenous people of that, none of those men belong up there to be memorialized. I mean, if we're honest. We know George Washington, slave owner, had no problem killing Indians. Abraham Lincoln, the great liberator, right? Before Lincoln was elected president, he was actually, I forget what the official title was, but it essentially was an anti-Indian police officer. Lincoln also signed the death warrant for the largest execution in United States history, carried out on December 26 of 1862, when in Mankato, Minnesota, just 90 miles from here, 38 Dakota men were hanged at one time. Lincoln signed that order of execution within 48 hours of signing the Emancipation Proclamation. In my imagination, both of those historic documents were sitting on his desk at the same time. Now, this photo you see on the left, this is a common photo, okay? Like this is, if you look for this, you'll see this image replayed by different Native people many, many times over. So these 4 young women are not the first 4 young women to stand in front of Mount Rushmore and give the old one-finger salute to the presidents. I've done it myself, okay? But just a few weeks ago, why is that upside down? Okay. I'm going to read it for you because I don't want any of you to injure yourself by standing on your head. Just a few weeks ago, a GOP candidate out of Texas for the oil and gas regulatory body, in seeing this photo, responds by saying, "Since we are going to denaturalize and deport all the third world savages who hate our country, I am calling for adding these third world savages, who we conquered, then bizarrely let have a nation inside our nation to the list. That gentleman's name was Beau French, a GOP candidate for Texas Oil and Gas Regulatory Body. And again, I apologize that, oh, you fixed it. God, you are all brilliant. Can we give it a hand for my tech team back there? So, you know, it's not the first time any representative of the United States government or aspiring representative of the United States government has referred to indigenous people as savages. It hurts every time we see it. I've lost count of the arguments I've been in about savages, about conquering, being conquered. It's a very common misunderstanding, right? Oh, well, indigenous people, they were conquered. You know how many treaties were made between the United States government and these conquered people? Over 450. You don't make 450 treaties with people you conquered. You make 450 treaties with people you couldn't conquer. The only time in American history where the United States of America conceded in a battle, and conceded in so doing by capitulating every demand made by their enemy, the only time that was ever done was in 1876, when a little man named Custer couldn't finish what he started with the Lakota people. The only time. Get out of here with this language about being conquered. Because the very fact that we have over 450 treaties which your U.S. Constitution declares as the supreme law of the land. The only reason we have those is because you could not conquer the indigenous people. And you can call us savages. We've been called that since before you were called Americans. Shows up in the Declaration of Independence. Did you know that? 30 lines below "We the People," this foundational U.S. document refers to my ancestors as merciless Indian savages. It's codified into the founding documents of our nation. And it all comes back to the doctrine of discovery. And when you think about it, we like to run through these thought experiments, right? To run through them. What would have happened if Columbus just had a modicum of decency? What would have happened if that whisper of the Spirit broke through the heart of Columbus? And I will propose to you that that was never a possibility. Never. Because the very doctrine under which Columbus was sailing made no allowance whatsoever that the people he discovered were actually people. They were necessarily enemies of the cross. That's not my language. That's language that comes directly out of the Vatican. And everything that those indigenous people valued, everything that they valued, remember, movable objects, immovable objects, every place they lived, in the harbors, and the cities, and the rivers, and where? Just all the places. And what of their bodies? Perpetual slavery. Perpetual slavery. Where do I, as an indigenous person, feel the echoes of the Doctrine of Discovery still today? That dehumanization, that perpetual slavery. American Indian people are underrepresented in every category of society except for a few. The categories of society where American Indian people are drastically overrepresented: penitentiaries, sexual assault and trafficking, having your children removed by the foster care system, criminal courts, perpetual slavery. And so now, because most of my work I do with faith communities, thought I would leave us with a quote from a Catholic theologian, James Keenan. Sin is not when we are weak and struggling. Rather, the greater sin is when we are strong and we can't be bothered. My friends, I really try not to get too churchy. I mean, I really do. Try not to get too churchy. But I was invited here to talk about the sin of the church. This is no longer a sin of omission. The perpetuation of the doctrine of discovery, see, now that your eyes have been opened, now you're accountable to what you've seen. If prior to knowing this, your sin of perpetuating the doctrine of discovery was that you didn't know, ignorance is bliss, and I just remove that luxury from you. You're no longer weak. You're no longer innocent. There can be no argument. You hold power. And when we use churchy language like sin, sin is not when we're weak and struggling. But sin is when we're strong. And I'll paraphrase, sin is when we're strong and we just don't give a damn. All of you in this room have some level of privilege. I hope we don't have to have that discussion about who has privilege and who doesn't, right? All of you. All of us. I have privilege, right? I'm a cisgendered heterosexual man. You think I don't have privilege? I have a tremendous amount of privilege. All of us have privilege. You're no longer weak. You're strong. I implore you, give a damn. With that, I want to thank you. We have... thank you. So we have about, 20 minutes or so?
We can give you the full 30.
Oh, okay.
We can eat fast.
I want to open it up for any Q&A or discussion, and I know that we're live. Ooh, that was almost bad. I know that we're live streaming this too, and so some questions may come from the interweb, but happy to entertain any questions or discussion. And we can have 2 roaming mics, and I can just tie myself to the podium if we want to. So.
No. Well, could I start with one?
Go ahead.
In the land acknowledgement that that was read at the beginning, that was shared with everybody in attendance, we described this land as stolen land, and you and the doctor at the Whipple building spoke to why do we call the land in Minnesota stolen land. Would you give us just a little picture of why that is the case here?
Absolutely. So I just got to get my bearings. It's like exactly where we're located. So the land that we are on right now, forgive me, I haven't studied this specific portion of Minneapolis, but my belief is that this is governed by a treaty that was negotiated in 1805 between Zebulon Pike and the Dakota people who were here at the time in 1805. First of all, Zebulon Pike had no government authority to actually negotiate any treaties. When he did negotiate this treaty, the criteria was that in order for the treaty to be considered valid, it had to be signed by a majority of the chiefs that were present as it was negotiated. And in 1805, there were 7 Dakota chiefs present, but only 2 of those chiefs signed the treaty. So it did not have the requisite number of signatures in order for this to be a valid treaty. And in order for a treaty to be considered valid at that time, it must be ratified by Congress and then proclaimed by a sitting president. The Treaty of 1805 was debated hotly in Congress because, again, Zebulon Pike had no actual vested authority to negotiate treaties on behalf of the U.S. government. However, he did. Now Congress is sitting with this treaty, and they're like, what do we do with this? It's a prime plot of real estate, but Zebulon Pike had no authority. Congress goes ahead and eventually they ratify the treaty, but that treaty of 1805 has never been proclaimed by any president, even to this day. So the pathway for validity on the treaty that governs this land was never fulfilled. In addition to that, the value for this land that Zebulon Pike negotiated in 1805, the value for this land, and I say this land, essentially, if you start right at Fort Snelling, you come up the Mississippi River 9 miles, which will put you essentially at St. Anthony Falls, a little bit beyond St. Anthony Falls, and then you do a weird circle on either side of the river. That's the land of the 1805 treaty. The value that Zebulon Pike negotiated for this land was $200,000. It's $200,000 in 1805, so a lot of money. When Congress eventually paid the Dakota people, they paid them $2,000. So, I think by any stretch of the logic, that's stolen. And so when we as Indigenous people, we speak of stolen land, I mean, here in the state of Minnesota, this is the first piece of stolen land, right here.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
I thought Pope Francis did something to get rid of this. What's the next part of that story?
Right. So Pope Francis did eventually, repudiate the Doctrine of Discovery. But let me ask you this. Do we have any Lutherans in the room? Okay. I mean, it's Minnesota. We're going to have Lutherans, right? You all repudiated the Doctrine of Discovery. How about Methodists? Do we have Methodists in the room? No. They're probably out sinning somewhere. Methodists repudiated the doctrine. Essentially, now that the Catholics have repudiated the Doctrine of Discovery, and that was just last year in 2024, or excuse me, 25, Pope Francis repudiated the Doctrine of Discovery. Now that the Catholics have repudiated it, essentially every branch of Christianity, with the exception of some of the conservative evangelical branches, but even some of the evangelical denominations have repudiated the Doctrine of Discovery. So this is a doctrine that has widely been repudiated, and I'll ask you, so what? Right? So what? We even have fancy church language coalitions like the Dismantling the Doctrine of Discovery Coalition, which is a great coalition that is headed up by the Mennonites. And I put this out there because it is a great name for a coalition, Dismantling the Doctrine of Discovery. We have all of these things, and I'll ask you, so what? It's like a land acknowledgement, right? We started with the land acknowledgement, which I think is a good thing. Please don't get me wrong. Being acknowledged is better than not being acknowledged. We have a land acknowledgement, but I ask you, so what? What does that do for Indigenous people? Are any Indigenous people doing better because we read a statement before our gatherings? No. It takes dedicated individuals to organize and act. And what does repudiation look like? What does moving beyond a land acknowledgement look like? Well, what do we understand from the Doctrine of Discovery? What do we understand from a land acknowledgement? Your own land acknowledgement explicitly stole it. Explicitly states it. This is stolen land. How do we move past the harm towards healing if we all acknowledge this is stolen land? We have to have honest discussions about returning land. We have to have very honest discussions about what reparations actually looks like. And I'm all for the flowy, churchy statements that repudiate Doctrine of Discovery. I'm all for that. I'm all for the committees that come up with land acknowledgements. I'm all for that, so long as you don't think that you actually accomplished anything. Because you didn't. What you've done is you've opened your eyes. You're maybe beginning to take that first breath of the morning to actually put your feet to the earth and move somewhere. Move to the next step. And that's what's required. That is what is for communities like yourself to discern. But this discernment cannot be done in isolation. Because you know what happens if you move towards this healing in isolation? Is you're going to be solving problems that we don't actually have.
So true.
So how's it done? It's done in relationship. So in terms of reparations for Indigenous people, this is a charge that I give every denomination, every congregation that I come into and I speak about reparations. I have a 3-point system. Number one, every church in our nation should be giving a significant portion of their budget to language and cultural reclamation projects for Indigenous people. Every church in our nation. This is to stop the bleeding. That is the legacy of the residential boarding schools. It was mentioned the chapter I wrote in the book that was utilized in the study about residential boarding schools. This is a trauma that affects every Native person in our nation. Every Native person in our country is no more than 3 generations away from one of their ancestors being stolen and removed and forcibly educated. Boarding schools is where language and culture went to die, and a sign of repentance by the church in America is to contribute to the reclamation of that language and culture. Step 1, every congregation in our nation should be giving a significant portion of your budget to language and cultural reclamation for Indigenous peoples. And I want to repeat, significant portion of your budget. This should cost you something. It really should. And I also use that word budget because I'm tired of getting special offerings. I'm tired of getting the overflow of benevolence funds or Good Samaritan purses. Reparations is an obligation. The same way you are obligated to pay for the lights and the salaries of your staff. It's an obligation. Put it in your budget. That's step 1. Step 2, you begin relationships with Indigenous organizations. This is maybe the hardest of the steps. Well, it's not the hardest. It is significantly harder than just giving money, because it actually requires your investment, it requires your vulnerability, and it requires your reciprocal relationship. Begin those relationships with Indigenous nations, Indigenous organizations, and Indigenous peoples. And I don't mean that you should open up your pulpit once or twice a year in Native American Heritage Month. Even though I spend my November, which is Native Heritage Month, in pulpits all around the state. I've lost count of the times that I have been told from hosting clergy, you're the first Native American we've had preach from our pulpit. And my response is always the same. How old is your church? Oh, we're 140 years old, I say proudly. You don't see a problem? You're a century and a half old and you've never heard from a Native person? I don't mind if I'm the first to be behind your pulpit, but I damn well would not be the last. Better not be the last. And I don't want to come in just as a special preacher. I want to be your theologian. I want to be your teacher. Okay? But you build that relationship. Find that organization. Build that relationship. Understand you're going to make mistakes, and when you make those mistakes, take your correction with humility. Don't do that. You want to know what one of the biggest frustrations in Indian country is when white allies show up and then they make a misstep, they're corrected, and then they disappear. Get over yourself. Honestly, get over yourself. You're going to make mistakes. This is a relationship. Can you imagine if you treated your spouse or your significant other that way? You make a mistake, well, we tried. Goodbye. No. Be invested. Build that relationship. Allow trust to grow. And when that relationship is established and trust has grown, number 3, and this is difficult, number 3, give the land back. Give the land back. I said it would hurt. I said it required vulnerability. You understand what reparations is? See, we've for too long thought that reparations was charity. And that if we're going to develop a reparations ministry, we'll just take the charity we already do and we'll just do charity better. Or we'll do charity bigger. No. Because charity requires zero vulnerability. Charity is not risky. Reparations, by definition, is risky. Requires vulnerability. And this is where I lose audiences. Because this third step is scary. But it's only scary if you think like a colonizer. And unfortunately, we've all inherited a colonizer mindset, right? Because when you hear give land back, your mind automatically goes to, well, the Indians are going to kick us out. You're thinking like a colonizer. Just because that's what your ancestors did, doesn't mean that that's what we'll do. Sharon Day is an Ojibwe teacher, spiritual leader. And when she was asked about this very thing, she put it so beautifully. She said, no one in history knows what it's like to be uprooted and removed. No one in history knows what that's like more than the American Indian people. We know that trauma. Why would we ever revisit that on anyone else? So imagine that you've built that relationship with an indigenous community or an indigenous organization. You've built that relationship. You've established the trust, that mutuality of trust. And in an act of vulnerability, you legally sign the title of the land over to that indigenous community, and because of your relationship, you can trust that they'll allow you to still use it. What would that be like? Because I've seen churches do land back, and you know what it usually looks like? It usually looks like a dying congregation that on their way out before they locked the door said, oh, it'd be really upstanding of us if we sign this over to the Indians. And then you know what the Indians get? They essentially get a decrepit building that is now a liability as opposed to an asset. And don't get me wrong, I'm grateful for any land return, but when your land return comes with, $2.5 million in deferred maintenance and upkeep, you're essentially writing off your liability to someone else. Which, don't get me wrong, is better than selling it to a real estate developer to put luxury condos someplace. But I want to see the church actually be the church. I want to see a congregation that says they follow the narrative of Christ into healing and repair, and I want to see them actually do the work of healing and repair. And if we're going to rightfully acknowledge that the land is stolen, and we're going to rightfully acknowledge that the harm has been perpetuated, then we better be about repair. And remember, it's going to be scary, it's going to be risky. But if you call yourself Christian, that's what you're supposed to do. I said I don't like to get too churchy, but when the Apostle Paul writes his letter to the Philippians, chapter 2, I paid a lot of money in seminary to know that this is called the kenosis passage. So I just throw that out there because I paid money to know that word. Okay? Kenosis just means emptying. And he tells the Philippians, the church of Philippi, he says, your attitude should be the same as that of Christ. who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God anything to be grasped, but he emptied himself, taking on the very nature of a servant, and being obedient, even obedient to the point of death on a cross. This is what the church is called to do. To not chase after the trappings of imperialism and capitalism and wealth building and legacy for generations. Like literally, if we're following the gospel that we say we are, it means we are obedient even when it costs us greatly. That's what the church is called to do. And my charge to the church is very simple. If you're not going to be about the work of reparations, that's fine. Just stop calling yourself Christian. I did say I don't like to get too churchy, don't I?
You did real good there. And I actually think you answered a lot of the pre-questions that we had received. And we thank you for being straight and honest with us. So we did ask you to come and tell us. So thank you for doing that. Is there anyone else in the room? I have one more question on the paper, but I would rather give someone in the room if we have anybody in the room.
How many people have Indian, Native American?
Who are here?
Yeah.
How many people here have Native American trace to, heritage? Not I. Wow. Just wow. There you go.
My grandmother was 9 years in a school.
Yeah.
Great-great-grandmother, not very far back.
Sure. No, they were still being run in the, as late as, I've heard the late 70s, but I've also heard the 90s.
I think, well, yeah, they took on a different form after, I believe what we would consider a residential boarding school, like the last one closed, I want to say in 1975.
Yeah.
But there were some hangers-on that went into the mid-90s.
Yeah.
Is there a question
Thank you.
back
Here, I'll come on back.
Hi, Jen. I'd like to go back to your third point and a statement that you made related to that. Lynn Butler from Minneapolis Friends Meeting. I wonder if the Palestinians could also claim to have been dispossessed and kicked out of their land and now are being slaughtered once again.
I mean, I think absolutely, yes. When you look at, and I want to parse my words very carefully because we're in a time when often any criticism of the nation state of Israel is misconstrued as a criticism of Jewish people, and that is not the case. We can be critical of the nation state of Israel and still maintain the dignity and humanity of Jewish people. When we look at the playbook that is rolling out in Palestine, I mean, it is an echo of history from the colonial experiment of the United States. The shrinking land base for Palestinian people is just moving native people onto reservations where they can live until the resources in that land become valuable. That's exactly, I mean, that's what we're seeing, right? We're seeing Palestinian villages that are being demolished because the water or the land or whatever resources now become valuable to the nation state of Israel. Yeah, it's the wholesale disposability of human beings. We've seen that before. The echoes of manifest destiny that are being claimed by the nation of Israel. I mean, come on. God gave us this land. I mean, that's, you might as well quote every U.S. senator in the 19th century, you know? Yeah, it's the comparisons are really just too numerous to even, like, it is exactly what we've already seen, we've already known, and it is heartbreaking. And what I think is even more heartbreaking is we now have access to live images of the atrocities, and hopefully we as human beings don't become jaded, which I think is a real possibility. And so I would encourage all of us. What a luxury it is to say, oh, I turned off the news because I just couldn't take it anymore, right? Remember when I talked about all of us holding privilege? That's a privilege we have. And I get it. A temporary removal from context for your own spiritual care, self-care thing. I get that. But stay engaged, you know? Take a weekend away to go up to Grand Marais and do some antiquing. But, you know, for God's sakes, come back to the real world and do real work.
Yeah.
Don't turn off and stay off. No.
Yeah.
All right.
And maybe the last thing is that we did have questions about your Twin Cities Sacred Sites tours, and I've read, but maybe you want to tell the group when you're going to resume that, and then I'll talk to you privately about the second question.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of what really made a name for me is in 2011, I started tours of Indigenous sacred sites all here in the Twin Cities. I started in 2011. Honestly, I thought that by the end of 2012, I would have exhausted my audience, and that anyone who wanted to have this experience would have, and that I would just have to find something else to do with my time, and I was fine with that. But that didn't happen. 2013 came, and there were more requests than 2012, and it's just been building. I run my tours from mid-April to early November because you can't pay me enough to sit outside in the snow for 4 hours. So I do my best to run them in the warmer weather months. And in that time, between mid-April and early November, I'll do about 50 different groups in that season. So it's a few thousand people who will come on a tour in any season. And at the risk of sounding grandiose, it really has gotten a lot of attention. I have groups that come from other states specifically for this. Last year I had 3 different state agencies, 4 different county agencies. I had a corporate client that flew in executives from the West Coast and the East Coast. So it really is a thing. And yeah, so we'll be starting them again in mid-April. And if New Branches wants to book one, you know, we can certainly book one just for you. And I mean, it really is a transformational experience. And so, who's been on the tour? Wow.
Wow.
Okay.
Good job.
Good. So, yeah, if you're on the fence about whether you want to do it, talk to one of those that had their hand up. And I have enough confidence to say that it was a meaningful experience for them. So.
Absolutely, that's what we have heard. Well, I want to take a few minutes to again thank you. It has been a profound honor. It has been a gift to each and every one of us, all the people in this room here, the well over 50, I don't even know what the current count is online.
I think it was like 1,000, right?
Yeah.
That's the preacher in me coming out.
There you go.
Don't ever trust a pastor or preacher when it comes to estimating numbers.
Estimating the crowd.
Yeah.
And we might disappoint you because this is not any title and fee that we are offering you, but we do want to give you, we want to compensate you for your time, for your wisdom, but also give you something from our hearts. We are a group of people here at New Branches. We are committed not to stopping at the land acknowledgement. And we look forward to a future time when you will come and you will be able to say, yeah, you got the message. So here's from us to you. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you. Let's give them a real round of applause. And I'm going to put in a plug because I want to thank the, first of all, the people who are part of Land Acknowledgement and Beyond Group. I call us a small but mighty group. If you are part of that group, would you please stand up for a moment? Tonight would not have been possible without them, without Dennis in the back, you're an honorary member, Carolyn in the back, Flockami's out in the room, but thank you. Let's give these people a round of applause. They are helping to keep the conversation alive, and if you do want to go and begin a relationship, I always tell people, the very first time I went to All Nations Indian Church, I don't know if you've heard this, but they gave me a knife, and they gave me King Hawaiian rolls, and they said, Sally, you could start by cutting these rolls, and I knew that there was a relationship to Sean Sherman, and I thought, Sean Sherman is really committed to keeping the food very pristine. I cut between all of the Hawaiian rolls, because I've never, ever cut a Hawaiian roll in half. People that at that luncheon were trying to figure out what was wrong with the rolls. Pastor Joanne came back and said to me, oh my God, I found rolls that weren't cut in half in the bowl. Who did that? Time for humility. I said, I did that. And do you remember when I told you I found one cut in half and asked if I should do it? And you said it was fine. That was me being a white defensive girl. And she looked at me, and we both started, she laughed at me for like an hour. But at the end of the afternoon, she came up to me and she said, do you think you're going to come back? And I said, am I allowed to come back? I wasn't smart enough to know how to cut the buns. And she said, we would love to have you come back. And more than once, she's had to tell me to get over myself, because I hate messing up, right? She loves to tell that story, so now you all know it, and you can just laugh at me, because we laugh all the time about it. But I will tell you, the next time there were buns to cut, I told everybody to back off. It was my Redemption Wednesday, because I was cutting every last one of those buns, and it has been so enriching. So please consider joining us on a Wednesday or a Friday. Okay, now let's get you food, let's get you home. Thank you so much for being with us.